The Houston sun blazed mercilessly as Captain Marcus Webb pulled his silver Mercedes into the executive aviation terminal, already irritated. Traffic on the I-10 had been a nightmare. Some accident involving a pickup truck and what looked like half the city's police force. He'd left his house in the Woodlands 40 minutes early, yet somehow still arrived with only 20 minutes to spare before his briefing. At 52 years old, with distinguished salt and pepper hair and a chest full of flight pins that glinted under his crisp white uniform shirt, Marcus considered himself aviation royalty. 25 years of flying private jets for oil executives, tech billionaires, C-suite celebrities, and the occasional politician had filled him with the kind of confidence that bordered on arrogance, though Marcus would never use that word. He preferred experienced, or seasoned, or the best in the business. His logbook read like a who's who of American wealth. That Saudi prince who tipped $10,000 in cash, the actress who'd cried through takeoff on every flight, the hedge fund manager who'd made him circle lax for 30 minutes because a phone call was too important to interrupt. Marcus had stories for days, and he told them at every pilot gathering, every happy hour, every chance he got. Today's flight should be simple. Houston to Denver, 8 hours round trip if he included the client's 3-hour meeting window. Premium pay, $2, $500 for the day, plus per diem. The operations manager had called it a high-priority VIP client, which usually meant tech money or oil money, the kind that didn't blink at chartering a private jet the way normal people didn't blink at calling an Uber. Marcus grabbed his flight bag from the passenger seat, genuine leather, monogrammed, a gift from a grateful client 3 Christmases ago, and strode through the automatic doors into the blessedly cool terminal. The marble floors gleamed, reflecting the Texas sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. A woman in designer sunglasses sat in one of the plush waiting area chairs, scrolling through her phone, probably waiting for her flight to Cabo or Aspen or wherever rich people went on random Thursdays. The terminal barista knew his order. "Morning, Captain Webb. Black coffee, no sugar." "You know it, Melissa." Marcus flashed his practiced smile, the one that had charmed flight attendants and clients for 2 decades. "Keep the change." He dropped a 20 for a $6 coffee because people remembered generosity, and generosity got you repeat bookings. His phone buzzed as he walked toward the briefing room. A text from the operations manager, "VIP client, everything must be perfect. Tom." Marcus rolled his eyes. Tom Chen always worried too much. Marcus didn't do imperfect. His safety record was spotless. Not a single incident, not a scratch, not even a hard landing in 25 years. He was the pilot you called when you absolutely, positively needed to arrive safely and on time. The briefing room smelled like coffee and jet fuel, that particular combination that existed only in aviation buildings. Tom was already there, a thick folder spread across the conference table, his finger tracing a route on a tablet screen. "Marcus, good you're here." Tom looked up, his expression stressed in that particular way that meant corporate was breathing down his neck. "This client is huge, Technova Solutions. You know them." "The cloud security company." Marcus took a long sip of coffee. "Sure, they're everywhere." "Billion-dollar company. The CEO is flying with us today, Patricia Williams. She uses us regularly, drops about $200K annually on charters." Tom slid the folder across. "Weather's good, route standard, but she wants everything perfect, professional, 0 issues." "Tom, you know me." Marcus didn't even open the folder. "I don't do issues." "Good, your Copilot is Captain J. Williams. Should be here any." The door opened behind Marcus. He heard it before he saw anything. The smooth roll of a flight bag's wheels on polished floor, the confident footsteps of someone who belonged in aviation spaces, the rustle of a uniform. Marcus turned, expecting to see his co-pilot for the day. Instead, he saw a young black woman. She couldn't have been more than 35, with smooth dark skin and natural hair pulled back into a professional low bun. Her pilot's uniform was impeccable, crisp white shirt with epaulettes, navy slacks with a perfect crease, black leather shoes shine to a mirror finish. Captain's bars gleamed on her shoulders, 4 gold stripes that matched his own. She was beautiful in that put-together, professional way that made Marcus immediately uncomfortable, though he couldn't have articulated why, or wouldn't. The woman's face lit up with a warm, professional smile as she approached the table. She extended her right hand confidently, her grip firm when she shook Tom's hand first. "Good morning, Tom." Her voice was clear, educated, with no trace of any accent Marcus could identify, just standard American English, the kind you heard on national news broadcasts. "Morning, Jasmine. Let me introduce you. This is Captain Marcus Webb. Marcus, this is Captain Jasmine Williams." She turned to Marcus, that same warm smile in place, her hand extended. "Captain Webb, I'm Captain Jasmine Williams. I'm really looking forward to flying with you today. I've heard great things about your safety record." Marcus's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. His hand remained at his side. The smile on Jasmine's face flickered just slightly like a candle in a draft. Her extended hand hung in the air between them. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 long, uncomfortable seconds, before she slowly lowered it. She'd seen this look before. The narrowed eyes, the tightened jaw, the almost imperceptible step backward that people took when they'd made an assumption and reality had contradicted it. The subtle recalculation happening behind someone's eyes as they tried to reconcile what they expected with what they were seeing. "You're the Copilot," Marcus finally said, and the way he said it, the tone, the pause, the slight emphasis on "your," made it sound less like a question and more like an accusation. Tom's expression tightened. He'd seen this before too from other pilots, and he hated it every time. Jasmine's smile stayed in place, but something shifted in her eyes. A guardedness, a wall going up that came from years of experience in spaces where she had to prove herself before she'd even spoken a word. "Yes, sir, Captain Jasmine Williams." She adjusted the strap of her flight bag on her shoulder, her posture remaining straight and professional despite the obvious slight. "I have my credentials if you'd like to review them, and I'm happy to go over the flight plan together. I've flown this route probably 50 times, so I'm very familiar with." "How long have you been flying?" Marcus interrupted, his eyes scanning her uniform as if looking for something out of place, some evidence that she didn't belong. The question hung in the air, loaded with implications that had nothing to do with flight hours and everything to do with doubt. Jasmine's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady, professional, perfect. Because she'd learned a long time ago that showing anything else would only confirm the prejudices already forming in people's minds. 12 years in commercial and private aviation, Captain Webb. I have over 3,000 logged flight hours. I'm instrument rated, type rated on 6 different aircraft classes, and I hold an ATP license with a perfect safety record. Marcus scoffed, an actual scoff, the sound of disbelief barely disguised as surprise. He exchanged a glance with Tom that said everything his mouth wasn't saying. 3,000 hours, well, another long sip of coffee, that's something. The words were technically complimentary. The tone was anything but. Tom shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the tension crackling in the air but seemingly unable or unwilling to address it directly. "Marcus, Captain Williams comes highly recommended. She's actually been flying." "I'm sure she's very capable," Marcus said, cutting Tom off. The pause before the word capable stretched just long enough to drain it of any actual confidence. "Why don't we just go over the pre-flight and get moving?" Jasmine reached into her bag and pulled out her credentials, her ATP license, her medical certificate, her passport, everything professionally organized in a leather holder. She offered them to Marcus with steady hands. He took them, but not before that same flicker of doubt crossed his face, as if he half expected them to be fake. What followed was a performance of skepticism that would have been comical if it weren't so insulting. Marcus examined each document with theatrical intensity, tilting her license toward the light as if checking for watermarks, running his finger along the edges as if feeling for irregularities. He spent 30 seconds staring at her photo, then looking up at her face, then back at the photo, as if she might be an imposter. Her ATP certificate, the highest pilot certification possible, received the same treatment. He squinted at the ratings, the restrictions box, the date of issue. When he finally handed them back, his expression suggested he'd found them technically acceptable but remained unconvinced. "Everything seems to be in order," he said, in a tone that implied the opposite. Outside the briefing room windows, the Gulfstream G650 sat gleaming on the tarmac like a promise or a threat, depending on who was looking at it. Neither Marcus nor Tom knew yet, but they were looking at Jasmine Williams's airplane. And the storm was just beginning. The silence in the briefing room stretched like taffy, uncomfortable and sticky. Jasmine carefully tucked her credentials back into her bag, her movements precise and controlled. She'd played this game before. Keep your composure, stay professional. Don't give them any reason to call you emotional or difficult, or any of the other words that seemed to attach themselves to women who dared to show frustration. Tom cleared his throat, desperate to move past the awkwardness he'd witnessed but not addressed. "Right, so let's go over the flight plan. Weather's beautiful, clear skies all the way to Denver. We've got—" "I'll handle the weather briefing," Marcus interrupted, pulling the folder toward himself and away from Jasmine, who'd been reaching for it. "I like to do my own analysis." Jasmine's hand hovered over the table for a moment before she withdrew it. "Of course. Though I should mention I already pulled the current METARs and TAFs this morning. There's a slight crosswind on arrival at Denver, but nothing significant. Winds 280 at 12, gusting to 18. Marcus didn't look up from the papers. "I'll verify that myself." "I'm just trying to. I've been doing weather briefings since before you were born, Captain Williams." He finally looked at her, and his smile was patronizing, the kind you'd give a child who tried to help with adult tasks. "I'm sure you mean well, but I have my own process. Works for me." Jasmine felt heat rising in her chest but kept her face neutral. "Understood, sir." The "sir" tasted bitter in her mouth. They held the same rank, both captains, both qualified to fly as pilot in command. But she already knew how this dynamic would play out. She'd seen it a dozen times before, in other cockpits, with other pilots who looked at her and saw something other than a colleague. Tom's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, relieved to have an excuse. "I need to take this. You two go ahead and start the pre-flight. Aircraft's fueled and ready, maintenance signed off this morning. Should be good to go." He practically fled the room. Jasmine and Marcus walked to the aircraft in silence, their footsteps echoing across the tarmac. The Gulf Coast humidity wrapped around them like a wet blanket despite the early hour. The Gulfstream G650 stood magnificent in the morning sun, its white paint gleaming, its lines sleek and powerful. It was a $65 million aircraft, capable of flying 7,000 nautical miles at Mach 0.925. And it was hers. But Marcus didn't know that yet. "Beautiful plane," Jasmine said softly, running her hand along the fuselage with the affection of someone who knew every rivet, every panel, every system intimately. Marcus grunted in acknowledgement, already climbing the air stairs to begin the exterior inspection. Jasmine followed, pulling out her own inspection checklist, a laminated card she'd created herself, more detailed than the standard one. "What's that?" Marcus asked, eyeing her checklist suspiciously. "My pre-flight checklist. I like to be thorough. We use the standard checklist here. That's the protocol." "This is the standard checklist. I just added some additional items based on." "If it's not in the official manual, we don't need it." Marcus's tone had an edge now, sharp and dismissive. "Let's stick to what works, shall we?" Jasmine bit the inside of her cheek and tucked her checklist away. Of course. They began the walk-around inspection, starting at the nose. Jasmine checked the radome, the pitot tubes, the static ports, all the items any competent pilot would check. She called out her findings clearly. Pitot heat operational, static ports clear, no visible damage to radome. Marcus said nothing, but he repeated every single check she just completed. Touched the same pitot tube, peered into the same static port, examined the same radome. After the third time he'd redone her work, Jasmine stopped and faced him. "Captain Webb, is there a problem with my inspection technique?" "Just being thorough," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Safety first, right? Can't be too careful." The implication hung in the air between them. "I can't trust your inspection. I have to verify everything you do." They moved to the engines. Jasmine crouched down to check the intake, her practiced eyes scanning for any foreign object debris, any damage to the fan blades. As she stood up, she nearly collided with Marcus, who'd bent down to check the exact same thing. "I already cleared it," she said quietly. "Just double-checking." "You're triple-checking at this point." Marcus straightened up, his face flushing slightly. "Look, I don't know you. I don't know your standards. I have a reputation to maintain, and that means I do things my way. If you've got a problem with that, you can take it up with Tom." A voice called out from near the hangar, "Everything okay over there?" Jasmine turned to see Captain Richard Morrison, a pilot she'd flown with half a dozen times, watching them from about 50 feet away. Richard was in his early 60s, a veteran pilot with a kind face and a reputation for fairness. He'd mentored Jasmine when she first started flying private charters, had recommended her for several jobs, and had once told her she was one of the finest pilots he'd had the pleasure of flying with. "We're fine, Richard," Jasmine called back, forcing brightness into her voice. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. He'd been in aviation long enough to recognize tension when he saw it, but he nodded and turned back toward the hangar, though Jasmine noticed he didn't go inside. He lingered near the door, watching. The inspection continued. Marcus questioned every reading Jasmine called out. When she checked the hydraulic fluid levels and reported them as normal, he insisted on checking them himself. When she examined the landing gear and found no issues, he spent 5 minutes doing his own inspection, muttering under his breath about proper protocols. By the time they reached the tail section, Jasmine's patience was wearing dangerously thin. She'd maintained her professionalism for 30 minutes now, but each dismissal, each redundant check, each implied doubt was another weight added to a scale that had been unbalanced since the moment she'd walked into that briefing room. "Captain Webb," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "I need to ask you directly. Do you have concerns about my qualifications to serve as your co-pilot today?" Marcus stopped his inspection of the APU exhaust. For a moment, she thought he might actually be honest. "It's not personal," he said finally. "I just have high standards. And you think I don't. I think you're young. I think you probably haven't seen the things I've seen, dealt with the situations I've dealt with. Experience matters in this job. I have 3,000 hours. And I have 18,000. He said it like a trump card, like those numbers erased any possibility of her competence. "When you've been flying as long as I have, you'll understand why I'm careful about who I trust in the cockpit." A maintenance worker rolled a fuel truck past them, slowing slightly to watch the exchange. Another witness to the humiliation, another person who'd see her being treated like a student pilot instead of the captain she was. Jasmine took a deep breath. "Captain Webb, I'm not asking you to trust me because of some abstract idea of fairness or equality. I'm asking you to trust me because I've earned it. My logbook, my ratings, my safety record, they speak for themselves." "On paper, sure." Marcus turned back to his inspection. "But paper and real-world performance are two different things." "Then let me demonstrate my real-world performance. Let me fly the left seat to Denver, and you can evaluate." "Absolutely not." The response was immediate and sharp. "I'm the pilot in command on this flight. That's not negotiable." Jasmine felt something crack inside her just a little. "I never said you weren't pick. I'm just suggesting." "I know what you're suggesting, and the answer is no." Marcus finished his inspection and headed toward the air stairs. "Let's move to the cockpit. We've wasted enough time out here." Wasted time. As if her thorough, professional inspection had been nothing but an inconvenience. Inside the cabin, the aircraft smelled like leather and possibility. The seats were cream-colored, plush, each one more comfortable than most people's living room furniture. A fully stocked galley, a private lavatory with real towels, a cabin that could seat 8 passengers in absolute luxury. Jasmine ran her hand along the bulkhead, feeling the familiar texture. She'd chosen this interior herself, had spent hours with the designers getting every detail right. But Marcus didn't know that. They climbed into the cockpit, settling into their respective seats. Jasmine took the right seat, the first officer's position, though it felt wrong, diminished, like wearing someone else's ill-fitting clothes. This was her aircraft. She should be in the left seat. But she said nothing. Marcus began the cockpit pre-flight, reading through the checklist. When it was Jasmine's turn to respond, he cut her off halfway through each item, as if he didn't trust her to complete a full sentence. "Circuit breakers. Check. I need to see them." He leaned over into her space, invading it, verifying with his own eyes what she just confirmed. "Captain Webb, you're going to have to trust." "Flight instruments." She gritted her teeth, all checked and, "Let me see the altimeter settings." This went on for 20 minutes. Every response she gave, he questioned. Every switch she set, he verified. It was like flying with someone who believed she was fundamentally incompetent, who saw her presence not as help but as a liability to be managed. A soft knock on the cockpit door made them both turn. Richard stood there, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes knowing. "Sorry to interrupt. Jasmine, can I borrow you for a second? Quick question about a flight I'm doing next week to DFW." It was an obvious excuse, a lifeline thrown to her. But Jasmine hesitated. Leaving now might make Marcus think she couldn't handle the pressure, that she was running away. Then again, 5 more minutes of this, and she might say something she couldn't take back. "I'll just be a moment, Captain Webb," she said, unbuckling. Marcus waved dismissively, already absorbed in his own checklist, as if her presence or absence made no difference at all. Richard led Jasmine down the air stairs and around to the far side of the aircraft, out of Marcus's line of sight. The moment they were alone, his professional mask dropped, replaced by genuine concern and barely contained anger. "How long has he been treating you like this?" Richard asked quietly. Jasmine leaned against the fuselage, suddenly exhausted despite the day barely beginning. "Since the moment I walked into the briefing room. He won't accept any of my checks, questions everything I say, treats me like I got my license from a cereal box." "I've known Marcus for 15 years. Richard's voice was tight with disappointment. "I've always suspected he was like this, but suspecting and seeing are different things." He paused. "You want me to talk to Tom, file a complaint?" Jasmine shook her head. "Not yet. I just need to get through this flight. 8 hours, then I never have to see him again." "You shouldn't have to get through working with a colleague, Jazz. This is discrimination, plain and simple." "I know what it is, Richard." Her voice came out sharper than intended. She softened it. "I'm sorry, I've dealt with this before. Different faces, same attitudes. If I make a big deal every time, I become difficult. Then the jobs dry up, the recommendations stop coming, and suddenly I'm the problem instead of the people who can't see past." She stopped herself, aware they were in public, on a tarmac where voices carried and nothing stayed private for long. Richard's expression was pained. "For what it's worth, You're twice the pilot Marcus Webb will ever be. And when this is over, I'm going to make sure Tom knows exactly what happened here today." "Thank you." Jasmine pushed off from the aircraft. "I should get back before he decides I've abandoned the flight entirely." "Wait," Richard pulled out his phone. "I'm documenting the time and what you've told me, just in case this becomes official later. That okay?" Jasmine nodded, grateful for his foresight even as part of her hoped it wouldn't be necessary. When she climbed back into the cockpit, Marcus barely acknowledged her return. He was on his phone, typing furiously, his face set in hard lines. "Everything all right, Captain Webb?" Jasmine asked, settling back into her seat. "Fine," the word was clipped final. "Let's finish this pre-flight. Client arrives in 45 minutes." They worked in tense silence, the only sounds the clicking of switches and the rustle of checklist pages. Jasmine called out her items. Marcus responded with grunts or single words. The cockpit felt smaller than it should, the air thick with unspoken hostility. Finally, Marcus set down his checklist and turned to face her directly. "I need to talk to Tom. Wait here." He was out of his seat and down the stairs before Jasmine could respond. Through the cockpit window, she watched him stride across the tarmac toward where Tom stood near the operations office, talking on his phone. Marcus approached with purpose, his body language aggressive, demanding. Jasmine's stomach sank. She knew that walk, that posture. She'd seen it before in other airports, other terminals, with other men who decided she didn't belong. She pulled out her own phone and texted her mother. "Might be a situation with today's flight. Nothing I can't handle. Love you." The response came back almost immediately. "Want me to make some calls?" "Not yet, just wanted to give you a heads up." "You know I don't like heads up, I like solutions." Jasmine smiled despite herself. Her mother had built a billion-dollar company from nothing. She wasn't the type to wait for problems to resolve themselves. "Just let me handle it first, please." "Fine, but I'm keeping my phone close." Through the windscreen, Jasmine watched the conversation between Marcus and Tom intensify. Tom's posture was defensive, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Marcus was pointing back at the aircraft, at her, his face flushed with anger or frustration or both. Other people were starting to notice. A flight attendant paused mid-stride across the tarmac, watching. Two mechanics working on a nearby aircraft had stopped their work. Richard stood near the hangar, arms crossed, his expression dark. Then Tom pulled out his phone and Jasmine knew. She just knew. Marcus was asking for a different co-pilot. The realization should have shocked her, but it didn't. It felt inevitable, like watching storm clouds gather and knowing rain was coming. You couldn't stop it. You could only decide whether to seek shelter or stand in it. Jasmine unbuckled and climbed down from the aircraft. If her career was about to be discussed, she'd be damned if she'd sit in the cockpit like a child sent to their room while the adults talked. Her footsteps on the tarmac were measured, unhurried. She'd learned long ago that rushing made you look desperate, anxious, guilty. She walked like someone who had every right to be exactly where she was. Marcus saw her coming and actually stepped in front of Tom, as if to block her from the conversation. But Jasmine walked right up to them, her chin high, her voice steady. "Is there a problem, gentlemen?" Tom looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him. "Captain Williams, we were just—" "I'll tell her," Marcus interrupted. "Look, this isn't personal, but I don't feel comfortable with the crew configuration for today's flight. I've asked Tom to find a more experienced co-pilot." "More experienced than 3,000 hours." Jasmine kept her voice level, professional, even as fury burned in her chest. "More experienced with me, with my flying style. This is a high-profile client and I need crew I can work with seamlessly. We haven't even taken off yet. You have no idea how seamlessly we could work together." "I've seen enough." The words landed like a slap. "I've seen enough." What had he seen? Her credentials thoroughly checked, her pre-flight inspection meticulously completed, her professional demeanor maintained despite his constant disrespect. Or had he just seen her face, her gender, her skin, and decided that was enough? "Captain Webb," Tom said, his voice strained, "I can't just pull Captain Williams from this flight. She's qualified, she's scheduled, and frankly, this request is." "Then I'm not flying." Marcus crossed his arms, his stance widening like a boxer preparing for a fight. "I have that right, don't I, if I don't feel the crew configuration is safe?" "Safe?" Jasmine's control finally cracked just a fraction. "You're questioning my safety." "I'm questioning whether we can work as an effective team, and my gut says no." "Your gut?" Jasmine laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Your gut, which has been wrong about me from the moment I walked in that door. Your gut, which didn't even bother to read my full qualifications before deciding I was inadequate." A small crowd had gathered now, not overtly watching, but not watching either. People found reasons to be nearby, to walk past slowly, to pause in their tasks. In the age of smartphones, Jasmine was aware that this conversation might already be recorded, might already be spreading through private pilot forums and aviation Facebook groups. Let it spread. She was done shrinking herself to make men like Marcus comfortable. Tom's phone rang. He looked at the caller ID and winced. "It's corporate. I need to." "Take it," Marcus said confidently. "Tell them I'm invoking my right to refuse to fly in unsafe conditions." "This isn't unsafe conditions." Jasmine's voice rose despite her best efforts. "This is you being." She stopped herself before she said it, before she put words to what they all knew was happening. Because once you said it out loud, once you called it discrimination, racism, sexism, the conversation shifted. It became about whether you were being too sensitive, too quick to play the race card, too difficult. But her silence was loud enough. Tom answered his phone, stepping away. "Yes, sir, we have a situation." Marcus turned back to Jasmine, and for a moment, something almost like guilt flickered across his face. But it vanished quickly, replaced by defensive righteousness. "This isn't about you personally," he said, lowering his voice. "You seem like a nice enough person. I'm sure you're a decent pilot, but I have standards and I've earned the right to maintain them. 25 years of flying gives me that right." "And 12 years gives me nothing," Jasmine asked quietly. "My ATP license gives me nothing. My 3,000 hours, my perfect safety record, my ratings on 6 aircraft types, none of that matters because you've decided, based on what exactly? 5 minutes of conversation, that I'm not good enough to sit in a cockpit with you." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I've made my position clear. If Tom can't accommodate my request, I'll find a company that will." Richard appeared at Jasmine's elbow, his presence solid and supportive. "Marcus, I've flown with Captain Williams multiple times. She's exceptional. Whatever concerns you have, I can personally vouch." "I don't need your vouching, Richard." Marcus's voice was cold now, the mask of professionalism completely abandoned. "I need a co-pilot I can trust. Is that really too much to ask?" "You can't trust her because she's black." The words came from one of the mechanics, a young Latino man who'd moved closer to hear the conversation. "That's what we're all hearing, right? That's what's happening here." The tarmac went silent. Marcus's face went from flushed to pale in seconds. "I never said anything about, that's not, you're putting words in my mouth." "Then tell us what it is," Richard said, his voice steady but hard as steel. "Because from where we're standing, you've been given a qualified pilot and you've spent the last hour questioning her credentials, redoing her work and now refusing to fly with her. So tell us, Marcus, what exactly is the problem?" Tom had ended his phone call and returned, his face grave. "Marcus, I think we need to talk, privately." "No," Jasmine spoke firmly. "No more private conversations about me without me. Whatever needs to be said, say it here." Tom looked between them, clearly torn. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, Marcus, corporate has asked me to get a formal statement from you about why you're refusing to fly this mission. They need specific, documented reasons for the crew change request. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Jasmine watched him struggle, watched him try to find words that would justify his position without revealing the prejudice underneath. He couldn't, because there weren't any. And in his silence, Jasmine pulled out her phone and made a call of her own. "Hi, Mom," she said clearly, her eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "Yeah, about that heads up. We're going to need those solutions after all." Patricia Williams answered on the second ring. Jasmine could hear the click of her mother's heels on marble floors, the ambient sounds of an office building, probably Technova's headquarters downtown. "Baby, what's happening?" Patricia's voice shifted instantly from CEO to mother, concern bleeding through the professional veneer. "The pilot they contracted as supplementary crew is refusing to fly with me," Jasmine said clearly, making sure everyone on the tarmac could hear. He cited vague concerns about experience and safety, despite reviewing my credentials. He's requested a replacement co-pilot. There was a pause. Jasmine could practically hear her mother's blood pressure rising. "He knows whose aircraft he's on." Patricia's voice had dropped to that dangerously quiet tone that every Technova executive had learned to fear. "I don't think he read the full briefing, Mom. I don't think he knows anything except what he assumed when he saw me. I'm 10 minutes away. Don't let him leave." The call ended. Marcus's face had gone from pale to ashen. Who was that? "My mother," Jasmine said simply, slipping her phone back into her pocket. "She's very interested in understanding why her transportation arrangements for today are falling apart." Tom looked like he might vomit. "Your mother, the client is your mother." "I never said she wasn't." Jasmine's voice was calm, almost pleasant. "You assigned me to this flight, Tom. You sent me the briefing. Did you not read who the passenger was?" Tom pulled up his tablet with shaking hands, scrolling through the flight manifest. His eyes went wide as the pieces clicked into place. "Oh my God, Patricia Williams, Technova CEO, you're her daughter, yes." Jasmine turned to Marcus, whose expression had shifted from defensive anger to dawning horror. "And the aircraft you've been refusing to fly, the one you've been treating as a company charter, that's registered to Williams Aviation Holdings, my family's company." The tarmac had gone completely silent except for the distant whine of a jet engine and someone's dropped wrench clattering against concrete. Every person within earshot had stopped what they were doing to watch this unfold. Richard let out a low whistle. "Oh, Marcus, you really stepped in it this time." Marcus's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. "I didn't," the briefing said. It listed this as a charter through Elite Aviation Services. "Supplementary crew through Elite Aviation Services," Jasmine corrected. "I needed a co-pilot for the flight to Denver because Mom wanted me to relax and not fly solo the whole way. You were hired to assist me, Captain Webb, not the other way around." The young mechanic who'd called out the discrimination earlier laughed, an incredulous, almost delighted sound. "Man, you can't make this stuff up." Tom was scrolling frantically through his tablet now. "Oh no, no, it's right here. Aircraft owner, Williams Aviation Holdings. Pick, Captain Jasmine Williams. Supplementary crew through Elite Aviation. Marcus, it's in the briefing. First page." "I didn't see. I must have missed." Marcus was grasping, drowning, trying to find any lifeline that might save him. "You didn't miss it," Richard said quietly. "You didn't read it, because you saw her name, saw her walk into that room, and decided you already knew everything you needed to know." A black Cadillac Escalade appeared at the terminal entrance, moving with the unhurried confidence of a vehicle that had never waited in traffic, never been denied access, never been told to wait. The windows were tinted dark, hiding the occupant but announcing their importance. Marcus straightened automatically, his pilot instincts kicking in despite the disaster unfolding around him. This was the client. This was the moment to be professional, charming, indispensable. Maybe he could still salvage this. Maybe if he explained the situation correctly, framed it as a safety concern, a miscommunication, anything but what it actually was. The driver, a tall black man in a dark suit, stepped out first and opened the rear passenger door. Patricia Williams emerged like royalty descending from a throne. She was 62 but could have passed for 50. Her silver-streaked black hair was styled in an elegant French twist, not a strand out of place despite the humidity. Her navy pantsuit was clearly custom-tailored, the kind you couldn't buy off any rack, fitting her tall, slender frame perfectly. Diamond stud earrings caught the sunlight, not ostentatious, just expensive enough to make a statement. Her leather briefcase was Hermes, her heels were Louboutin, and her expression was absolutely frigid. She moved across the tarmac with the walk of someone who'd spent 40 years commanding boardrooms, negotiating billion-dollar deals, and refusing to accept anything less than excellence from everyone around her, including herself. Marcus's professional smile snapped into place. He stepped forward, hand extended, voice shifting into that warm, confident tone he'd perfected over 2 decades of charming, wealthy clients. "Good morning. You must be Mrs. Williams. I'm Captain Marcus Webb, and I want to assure you that despite some minor scheduling complications this morning, everything is." Patricia's hand came up, palm forward, stopping him mid-sentence as effectively as a brick wall. She didn't even look at him. Her eyes were scanning the tarmac, searching for and finding her daughter. "Where's Captain Williams?" Her voice was cultured, educated, with the faintest hint of a Memphis accent that only appeared when she was angry. "Where is my pilot?" Marcus blinked. "Well, there's been a situation with the Copilot assignment, but I can assure you as the pilot in command that—" "Mom," Jasmine's voice carried across the tarmac, relief and apprehension mixed in equal measure. Patricia's stern expression transformed instantly, her whole face softening as she saw her daughter. "There's my baby girl." She moved past Marcus as if he were a piece of luggage someone had left in the way, an obstacle to be navigated around, not a person to be acknowledged. Her heels clicked purposefully across the concrete as she met Jasmine halfway, pulling her into an embrace that spoke of deep love and fierce protectiveness. Marcus stood frozen, his extended hand still hanging in the air, his brain struggling to process what was happening. Tom stood beside him, equally paralyzed, watching his company's most lucrative client relationship implode in real time. "I got your text," Patricia said, pulling back but keeping both hands on Jasmine's arms, studying her daughter's face the way mothers do, reading everything that wasn't being said. "Tell me what happened." Jasmine glanced at Marcus, then back to her mother. "It's complicated, Mom. Can we maybe discuss this?" "It's not complicated at all," Patricia said, her voice carrying across the tarmac with boardroom authority. "I hired a pilot through Elite Aviation Services to serve as supplementary crew for my daughter. That pilot has apparently decided he won't fly with her. I'd like to know why." She turned now to face Marcus fully, and her expression could have frozen the Gulf of Mexico. "Captain Webb, is it?" Each word was precisely enunciated, sharp as broken glass. "I'm Patricia Williams, CEO of Technova Solutions. Perhaps you've heard of us. We're that billion-dollar company that's been featured in Forbes, Fortune, and the Wall Street Journal. The one that just signed a $300 million government contract for cybersecurity infrastructure." Marcus's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am. It's an honor to." "My daughter tells me there's been a problem with today's flight." Patricia's eyes were laser-focused, the same gaze she used in boardrooms when someone had disappointed her. "She says you've refused to fly with her. I'd very much like to hear your explanation for that decision." Tom stepped forward, his tablet clutched like a shield. Mrs. Williams, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I'm sure we can resolve this. Mr. Chen. Patricia didn't raise her voice, but the temperature on the tarmac seemed to drop 10 degrees. I'm not speaking to you. I'm speaking to Captain Webb, the man who looked at my daughter's credentials, her 3,000 flight hours, her ATP license, her perfect safety record, and decided none of that was sufficient. Around them, the crowd had grown. Word had spread through the terminal that something was happening on the tarmac, and pilots, mechanics, flight attendants, and ground crew had found reasons to be nearby. Some were recording on their phones, not even trying to hide it anymore. Marcus's face was cycling through colors, pale to flushed to pale again. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the morning hour. His carefully constructed professionalism was crumbling, revealing the panic underneath. Mrs. Williams, I apologize if there's been any confusion, but I was simply trying to ensure the highest safety standards for. Answer my question, Captain Webb. Patricia's voice cut through his explanation like a scalpel through tissue. What specifically about my daughter's qualifications made you feel she was unsuitable to serve as your co-pilot today? Marcus's mouth opened, closed, opened again. And in that moment of silence, Jasmine stepped forward, pulling out her phone and displaying the crew briefing document. Maybe this will help clarify things, Mom, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion churning underneath. The briefing Captain Webb claims he didn't fully read, the one that clearly states who owns the aircraft he's been refusing to fly. Patricia took the phone, her eyes scanning the document. Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted, a coiling, like a predator preparing to strike. I see, she said quietly. Captain Webb, you were hired as supplementary crew. My daughter is the pilot in command. This aircraft belongs to our family, and you've spent the morning treating her like an incompetent trainee rather than the qualified captain she is. She looked up from the phone, her eyes locking onto Marcus with an intensity that made him physically step backward. So let me ask you one more time, and I suggest you think very carefully about your answer. What made you decide my daughter wasn't qualified to fly her own airplane? The question hung in the humid Texas air like a guillotine blade, waiting to drop. Every person on that tarmac knew they were witnessing something significant, a reckoning that had been building for far longer than just this morning. Marcus's face had gone through every shade of red and was now settling into a sickly gray. His mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before words finally emerged, stumbling and desperate. Mrs. Williams, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding here. I never questioned your daughter's qualifications per se. I simply felt that, given the high-profile nature of this flight and my own extensive experience, 25 years in the cockpit, it would be prudent to ensure we had a crew dynamic that was, optimized for. Stop, Patricia's single word cut through his rambling like a sword through silk. Just stop. She turned to Tom, who looked like he wished he could teleport anywhere else on Earth. Mr. Chen, I need you to pull up Captain Webb's full personnel file. Right now. Tom's hands shook as he scrolled through his tablet. Mrs. Williams, I'm not sure I can share confidential employee. You're about to lose a $2.3 million annual contract with Technova if you don't, Patricia said calmly. That's what we've spent with Elite Aviation Services over the past 2 years. So I suggest you decide very quickly whether Captain Webb's privacy is worth that much to your company. Tom's finger moved almost involuntarily, pulling up the file. Patricia leaned in to read, and Jasmine watched her mother's jaw tighten with each passing second. When she looked back up at Marcus, her expression was absolute zero. 3 complaints, Patricia said softly. 3 separate complaints filed against you in the past 18 months. 2 for hostile work environment, 1 specifically citing discriminatory behavior toward ground crew. All of them flagged by HR as concerning, but not acted upon because you have, let me quote, strong client relationships and an excellent safety record. Marcus's face drained of what little color remained. Those complaints were investigated and found to be unsubstantiated. Patricia's laugh was bitter. No, Captain Webb, they were found to be inconclusive, which is very different from saying they didn't happen. It means your company chose your revenue generation over the dignity of the people you work with. Richard's voice came from the gathered crowd, heavy with disgust. 3 complaints. Jesus, Marcus, we all knew you were difficult, but I have never. Marcus's voice was rising now, defensive and cornered. I have always been professional. I have never discriminated against anyone based on. Then explain this morning, Jasmine said quietly, stepping forward to stand beside her mother. Explain why you questioned my credentials repeatedly, why you redid every single one of my pre-flight checks, why you dismissed my weather briefing, my safety analysis, my experience. Why you told Tom you needed a more experienced Copilot when you hadn't even asked about my background beyond a single dismissive question. I was being thorough. You were being disrespectful. Patricia's voice cracked like a whip. You saw my daughter walk into that briefing room, and in less than 5 seconds, you decided she didn't belong. You looked at her face, her age, her gender, and you made a judgment that had nothing to do with her qualifications and everything to do with your own prejudices. That's not, I didn't. Marcus was floundering, grasping for any explanation that might save him. You're putting words in my mouth, assumptions in my head that aren't. Patricia pulled out her phone, swiping through it with the practiced ease of someone who lived on technology. She turned the screen toward Marcus. This is my daughter's resume, Captain Webb. Let me read it to you, since you clearly didn't bother to research who you'd be flying with today. Her voice took on a formal, presentation quality, the same tone she used when addressing Technova's board of directors. Jasmine Patricia Williams, Bachelor of Science in Aeronautical Engineering from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, graduated summa cum laude. Commercial pilot's license obtained at age 22. ATP license at 25. Type ratings on the Cessna Citation Series, Gulfstream G450 and G650, Bombardier Global Express, Embraer Legacy 600, and Boeing 737. She scrolled down, her voice gaining strength with each accomplishment. 3,247 logged flight hours across 12 years. 0 incidents, 0 accidents, 0 safety violations. Certified flight instructor with advanced ground instructor rating. She served as a check pilot for 2 regional airlines, evaluating other pilots' competency. She's flown in Category III weather conditions, performed emergency landings that saved lives, and has commendations from 3 different aviation safety boards. Patricia looked up from her phone, her eyes burning into Marcus. She's also flown humanitarian missions to disaster zones, transported medical supplies during the pandemic, and volunteered her time training young women and people of color who want to enter aviation, but face the same barriers she's had to overcome her entire career. The tarmac was completely silent now, except for Patricia's voice. My daughter has forgotten more about flying than most pilots will ever learn. She's not just qualified, Captain Webb, she's exceptional. And you decided all of that, every hour, every rating, every accomplishment, was worth less than your gut feeling based on what exactly? Marcus had no answer. His face was the color of old newspaper, sweat staining his uniform collar despite the air conditioning he'd been standing in moments ago. Tom's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and went even paler. That's corporate again. The CEO wants to speak with all of us. Immediately. Good, Patricia said crisply. She pulled out her own phone, making a call on speaker. Sarah, Jennifer, are you both on? 2 voices responded affirmatively. Sarah Chen, Technova's legal counsel, and Jennifer Martinez, their head of human resources, both of whom Jasmine recognized from company events and board meetings. I'm here at the Houston Executive Terminal with my daughter and a Captain Marcus Webb from Elite Aviation Services, Patricia said, her voice shifting into full CEO mode. "I need you both to listen carefully to what I'm about to say, as it will inform our business decisions going forward." Marcus's eyes went wide. "Mrs. Williams, please, if we could just discuss this privately." "Privacy is a privilege you forfeited when you publicly disrespected my daughter," Patricia said coldly. "Sarah, Jennifer, Captain Webb was contracted to serve as supplementary crew on our aircraft today. Upon meeting my daughter, he spent an hour questioning her credentials, redoing her safety checks, and ultimately refusing to fly with her, citing concerns about her experience despite having never worked with her before." Sarah Chen's voice came through the speaker, sharp and professional. "Captain Webb, I'm Technova's general counsel. Can you confirm these statements?" Marcus looked around desperately, seeking support that wasn't there. Richard had turned away, shaking his head. Tom was staring at his shoes. The other pilots and ground crew simply watched, their expressions ranging from anger to pity to satisfaction at seeing arrogance finally meet consequences. There were legitimate concerns about crew compatibility," Marcus stammered. "In my professional judgment." "Based on what?" Jennifer Martinez's voice cut in. "Based on what specific evidence did you form this professional judgment? Had you flown with Captain Williams before?" "No, but..." "Had you reviewed her full credentials, her logbook, her safety record?" "I reviewed her licenses." "But not her background, her experience, her ratings," Jennifer pressed. "You made a snap judgment within minutes of meeting her. Is that correct?" The silence that followed was damning. Jasmine watched Marcus's face as the reality sank in. This wasn't just about one flight anymore. This wasn't just a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with an apology and a handshake. This was his entire career collapsing in real time, live streamed and recorded by a dozen phones, witnessed by dozens of colleagues. "Captain Webb," Patricia said, her voice dropping to something quiet but infinitely more dangerous. "My father, Jasmine's grandfather, was one of the Tuskegee Airmen. Do you know what that means?" Marcus shook his head mutely. "It means he fought for the right to serve his country in the skis when men who looked like you told him he wasn't capable. He faced discrimination that makes your behavior this morning look genteel by comparison. And he succeeded anyway. He flew 68 combat missions, earned the Distinguished Flying Cross, and came home to build the aviation company that now owns that aircraft you were so eager to command." She stepped closer to Marcus, and he actually stepped back. "My father taught my daughter to fly when she was 15 years old, in the very first plane he ever owned, a Cessna 172 that's now in a museum. And he told her the same thing he told me. Baby girl, they're going to try to make you small. They're going to question whether you belong in the sky. But remember, the sky doesn't care what you look like. It only cares if you know what you're doing." Patricia's voice cracked slightly, just for a moment. "My daughter knows what she's doing, Captain Webb. She's always known. The only person who didn't know it was you, and that's because you never bothered to look past your own prejudices to see who was actually standing in front of you." She turned to Tom. "I want Captain Webb removed from this assignment immediately. Elite Aviation Services will be receiving a formal complaint, and Technova's legal team will be reviewing our contract for any anti-discrimination clauses that may have been violated." Tom nodded miserably. "Yes, ma'am. Marcus, I need your badge and credentials. You're suspended pending investigation, effective immediately." The words fell like a death sentence. Time seemed to slow down as Tom Chen extended his hand, palm up, waiting. The gesture was simple, bureaucratic even, but on that sun-baked tarmac it felt like a public execution. "Badge and credentials, Marcus, now." Marcus's hand moved to his lanyard, the one with his elite aviation ID, the one he'd worn every day for 7 years. His fingers trembled as they fumbled with the clip. 25 years of flying, thousands of hours in the air, hundreds of satisfied clients, all of it reduced to a plastic card on a lanyard. Tom, you can't be serious, Marcus's voice cracked. You're going to suspend me over this, over a personality conflict. It's not a personality conflict. Tom's voice was hard, professional, but underneath Jasmine could hear the anger. It's discrimination. And you know what? I should have seen this coming. I should have acted on those other complaints months ago. Those were investigated. They were found to be inconclusive because we didn't want to lose a senior pilot, Tom interrupted, his face flushing with what looked like shame. We chose convenience over doing the right thing, but I'm done with that. We're done with that. Marcus yanked the lanyard over his head, the motion violent and desperate. He thrust it toward Tom with a shaking hand. Fine, take it. But this is wrong, Tom. You know it's wrong. I'm being railroaded here because I made one mistake. One mistake, Richard's voice rang out from the crowd. He stepped forward, his weathered face tight with disgust. Marcus, I've watched you treat ground crew like servants for years. I've heard the comments you make about female pilots when you think no one's listening. I've seen you dismiss younger pilots, minority pilots, anyone who doesn't fit your narrow view of what a real aviator looks like. Another voice joined in, Captain Susan Martinez, a Latina pilot in her 40s whom Jasmine had flown with before. He called me sweetheart on a flight deck last year. When I corrected him, he told me I was being too sensitive. Filed a complaint. Nothing happened. Tom's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen and his face went from red to white in an instant. That's our CEO, personally. She wants a full incident report by end of day, and she's used the word liability 3 times in one text message. Marcus seemed to deflate, his shoulders sagging as the reality sank in. He looked around at the faces surrounding him, colleagues he'd worked with for years, people he'd shared crew lounges and layovers with, people he'd thought were his friends. Not one of them was looking at him with sympathy. I want statements from everyone who witnessed today's events, Tom announced to the gathered crowd, his voice carrying the weight of corporate necessity. Written statements to my email by 5 p.m. today. Include everything you saw and heard. Hands went up immediately. Susan Martinez nodded. The young mechanic who'd called out the discrimination earlier pulled out his phone. Already started writing mine, he said. Got video too if you need it. Send it, Tom said flatly. Marcus turned to face Patricia and Jasmine, and for the first time that morning, something that might have been genuine remorse flickered across his face. But it was too little too late, and Jasmine could see it was laced with self-preservation rather than actual understanding. Mrs. Williams, Captain Williams, he began, his voice thick with desperation, I sincerely apologize. I let my unconscious biases affect my professional judgment. I should have given you a fair chance. I should have been more open-minded. If you could find it in your hearts to. Stop, Jasmine said quietly. The word cut through his plea like a blade. Just stop, Captain Webb. She stepped forward, close enough that he had to look her directly in the eyes. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry there are consequences. If my mother hadn't shown up, if I'd just been some random black woman pilot without connections or resources, you'd have got me removed from this flight and never thought about it again. You'd have gone on treating people like me, like we don't belong, like we haven't earned our place, and you'd have felt completely justified doing it. Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but Jasmine wasn't finished. I've been flying for 12 years, Captain Webb. 12 years of being the only woman in the room, often the only person of color. 12 years of having to be twice as good for half the recognition. 12 years of smiling through microaggressions and outright discrimination, because speaking up meant being labeled difficult or unprofessional. Her voice remained steady, but there was steel underneath it now. I'm done being quiet. I'm done making excuses for people like you. And I'm done accepting your hollow apologies that are really just attempts to save your own skin. Patricia placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, a gesture of pride and support. She addressed Marcus directly, her CEO voice back in full force. "Captain Webb, I'm personally reaching out to the boards of 3 major airlines where Technova holds significant influence through our contracts and investments. I won't ask them to blacklist you. That would be illegal and unethical. But I will make sure they're aware of this incident, your pattern of complaints, and the kind of work environment you create." Marcus's eyes went wide with panic. "You can't do that. You'll destroy my career." "No, Captain Webb," Patricia's voice was ice cold. "You destroyed your career. I'm simply ensuring the wreckage is visible so other people don't get hurt by it." She turned to Tom. "I'm also putting Elite Aviation on notice. If this incident is swept under the rug, if meaningful changes aren't implemented, Technova will terminate our contract, and I'll personally recommend that every business leader I know does the same. Am I clear?" "Crystal clear, Mrs. Williams," Tom said, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past 20 minutes. "Marcus, you need to leave. Security is standing by if necessary." "Security?" Marcus's voice rose in disbelief and humiliation. "You're going to have me escorted out like a criminal." "You're lucky that's all we're doing," Tom replied coldly. "Now go, clear out your locker, turn in your parking pass, and wait for HR to contact you about next steps. Your union rep will be informed." Marcus looked around one final time, searching for any ally, any friendly face, anyone who might speak up for him. He found none. Even the pilots who'd worked with him for years, who'd shared beers with him after flights, who'd laughed at his stories, they all looked away. Richard met his eyes for a brief moment. "I hope you learned something from this, Marcus, but I doubt you will." The crowd parted as Marcus walked toward the terminal, creating a corridor of judgment. His footsteps echoed too loudly on the concrete. His uniform, usually worn with pride, now felt like a costume from a performance that had ended badly. Behind him, he could hear the buzz of conversation resuming, the click and tap of people typing on their phones. The story was already spreading, he could feel it. By this afternoon, every pilot in Houston would know. By tomorrow, it would be on aviation forums and Facebook groups. By next week, his name would be synonymous with everything wrong in the industry. His phone started buzzing in his pocket, texts, calls, notifications piling up. He pulled it out with trembling hands. Text from another elite aviation pilot. "Dude, WTF did you do?" Email from the company's head of HR. "Meeting tomorrow 9 a.m. Bring your union rep." Notification from an aviation forum he frequented. Someone had posted about an incident at Houston Executive Terminal involving discrimination. Another text, this one from a pilot he'd mentored years ago. "Really disappointed in you, man. Thought you were better than this." Marcus felt his chest tighten, his breathing becoming shallow. This wasn't how today was supposed to go. This was supposed to be a routine flight, premium pay, 8 hours and done. How had it spiraled so completely out of control? But deep down, in a place he didn't want to examine too closely, he knew exactly how. He knew it had started the moment Jasmine walked into that briefing room. The moment he'd looked at her and decided she didn't belong, couldn't possibly be qualified, must have gotten her position through something other than merit. He'd made those judgments in seconds, without evidence, without rational thought. Just pure, reflexive bias that he'd spent 25 years telling himself he didn't have. As he reached the terminal door, he turned back one last time. The Gulfstream sat on the tarmac, magnificent and untouchable, gleaming in the Texas sun. Patricia and Jasmine stood beside it, arm in arm, already moving on, already past him. A new pilot was jogging across the tarmac, young, eager, professional. Tom was greeting him, shaking his hand, welcoming him to the crew. Marcus's replacement. The terminal door closed behind him with a soft, final click that sounded like the end of everything he'd built. Inside, the air conditioning hit him like a wall of ice. The terminal that had felt so familiar this morning now felt foreign, hostile. The barista who'd known his coffee order looked away when he approached. The receptionist at the operations desk suddenly became very interested in her computer screen. He was already a ghost. Marcus slumped into one of the waiting area chairs, his head in his hands, his career crumbling around him while outside, through the massive windows, he could see the Gulf Stream being prepared for flight. Prepared for flight without him. By a pilot he dismissed without a second thought. And for the first time in 25 years, Captain Marcus Webb had to face the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he'd been wrong about more than just this morning. Maybe he'd been wrong about everything. Captain Carlos Rodriguez arrived at the terminal within 40 minutes of Tom's emergency call. At 28 years old, he had the kind of energy that came from someone who genuinely loved what they did and hadn't yet been worn down by industry cynicism. His uniform was crisp, his flight bag well organized, and his dark hair was neatly trimmed. But what struck Jasmine most was his eyes, alert, intelligent, and genuinely excited. Tom intercepted him near the operations desk, speaking in low, urgent tones. Carlos's expression shifted from curious to serious as Tom explained the situation. His eyes found Jasmine across the terminal, and she saw him nod slowly, understanding settling over his features. He approached with his hand extended and a respectful smile that reached his eyes, not the forced professional smile Marcus had worn, but something genuine. "Captain Williams, I'm Captain Carlos Rodriguez. It's an honor to be flying with you today." His handshake was firm, equal, with none of the hesitation or testing that Marcus had shown. "I've actually heard great things about your work from Captain Morrison. He speaks very highly of your skill." Jasmine felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "Thank you, Captain Rodriguez. I appreciate you coming on such short notice." "Please call me Carlos." He glanced back at Tom, then lowered his voice. "I'm sorry about what happened this morning. That shouldn't have happened to you, ever." The acknowledgement, simple and direct, almost undid her. Jasmine had grown so accustomed to people dancing around discrimination, calling it misunderstandings or personality conflicts, that having someone simply name it felt revolutionary. "Thank you," she said quietly, "and thank you for not making this awkward." "There's nothing awkward about working with a qualified pilot," Carlos said matter-of-factly. "Now, where are we in the pre-flight? What do you need from me?" "What do you need from me? Not what should I check because I don't trust your work. Not let me take over because I know better. Just a simple question from one professional to another." "Let's run through the checklist together," Jasmine said, feeling her professional confidence returning. "Weather's good, aircraft's fueled and ready. I'd like your eyes on the flight plan. There's a slight crosswind expected on arrival at Denver, nothing significant but worth discussing our approach." "Absolutely, lead the way." They walked to the aircraft together, and Jasmine was acutely aware of how different this felt. Carlos walked beside her, not ahead. He listened when she spoke instead of interrupting. When she pointed out features of the Gulf Stream, he asked intelligent questions rather than dismissing her knowledge. Patricia had been watching from near the terminal entrance, her phone pressed to her ear, conducting what sounded like a very intense conversation with someone at Elite Aviation's corporate headquarters. She caught Jasmine's eye and gave a small nod of approval at the new dynamic. As they climbed into the cockpit, Carlos let out a low whistle. "This is a beautiful aircraft. G650, right? These are incredible machines." "She is," Jasmine said, settling into the left seat, the captain's seat where she belonged. "Have you logged many hours in Gulf Streams?" "About 200 in the G450. This is only my second time in a G650, Carlos admitted, pulling out his own checklist. "So I'm definitely deferring to your expertise here. You know this bird better than I do." The honesty was refreshing. No posturing, no false bravado, just a pilot who understood that experience with a specific aircraft mattered regardless of total flight hours or time in the industry. They began the pre-flight together, their communication falling into an easy rhythm. When Jasmine called out a checklist item, Carlos responded clearly and waited for her confirmation before moving on. When he had a question about a system, he asked it respectfully. When she explained something, he listened and acknowledged her expertise. Engine start procedure on the G650 is a bit different from the 450, Jasmine explained. We'll be using the APU for ground power, and I like to monitor the ITT carefully during start. Makes sense, Carlos said, making a note. What's your threshold for aborting a start? They discussed procedures, weather considerations, and emergency protocols like the professionals they both were. No ego, no one-upmanship, just two skilled pilots preparing for a safe flight. Through the cockpit window, Jasmine could see Tom talking with several other pilots, probably getting those witness statements he'd requested. Marcus was nowhere to be seen, likely already gone from the terminal, but his absence felt loud somehow. Richard appeared at the bottom of the air stairs. Mind if I come up for a second? Of course, Jasmine called down. He climbed into the cockpit, looking between Jasmine and Carlos with something like relief. Just wanted to check on you, Jazz. Make sure you're okay. I'm okay, she said, and realized she meant it. The morning had been traumatic, exhausting, infuriating, but she was still here, still flying, still refusing to be driven out of a cockpit by someone else's prejudice. Richard nodded, then extended his hand to Carlos. Richard Morrison, good to meet you. Carlos Rodriguez, honor to meet you, sir. Take care of her up there, Richard said, and there was weight behind the words. She's one of the best. I don't doubt it for a second, Carlos replied. After Richard left, Carlos turned to Jasmine. He really cares about you. That's good to see. Richard's been a mentor to me since I started in private aviation, Jasmine said. He's one of the good ones, treated me like a pilot from day one. That should be the baseline, not the exception, Carlos said quietly. Then he shifted back to business. Okay, so talk me through your pre-flight inspection process. I want to make sure I'm following your standards since this is your aircraft. Over the next 30 minutes, they completed the most thorough, professional, and pleasant pre-flight check Jasmine had done in months. Carlos was attentive without being overbearing, questioned without being dismissive, and deferred to her expertise while still contributing his own knowledge. They were just finishing the cockpit setup when Patricia appeared in the cabin doorway, having ended her phone call. How are we looking, Captain? She asked Jasmine. Ready for departure, Mom. Just need our final passenger aboard and we can start taxi. Patricia smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. The anger from earlier still simmered underneath. I just got off the phone with Elite Aviation's CEO. They're implementing mandatory anti-discrimination training for all pilots, starting next week. They're also conducting a full review of their complaint handling procedures. That's good, Jasmine said, though she knew words and policies didn't always translate to real change. It's a start, Patricia agreed, but I'll be monitoring closely. If this becomes lip service that fades in a few months, they'll lose every contract with every company I have influence over. She looked at Carlos, assessing him with the same sharp gaze she used in boardrooms. Captain Rodriguez, I understand you're new to this situation. Thank you for stepping in professionally. Ma'am, I'm just doing my job, Carlos said respectfully. Flying with qualified pilots. Your daughter happens to be extremely qualified. Yes, she is. Patricia's expression softened slightly, and I'm glad she has a professional crew today. Tom appeared at the cabin door, tablet in hand. Mrs. Williams, Captain Williams, I have the final flight plan filed. Carlos, your supplementary crew contract is updated in the system. And Marcus, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Marcus has left the premises. His union rep has been notified and HR will be conducting a formal investigation. What about the other complaints? Jasmine asked. The ones that were filed before today. Tom's face flushed with shame. "They're being reopened, all of them, and I've been instructed to implement a zero-tolerance policy going forward. No more inconclusive investigations that go nowhere." "See that you do," Patricia said coolly. "Because Technova isn't the only company watching elite aviation right now. This story is already spreading through the industry. How you handle it will determine whether you come out of this with an improved reputation or a destroyed one." Tom nodded miserably and retreated. Patricia settled into her seat in the cabin, pulling out her laptop but not opening it yet. Instead, she looked at her daughter through the cockpit door, and Jasmine saw something fierce and proud in her mother's eyes. They'd had to fight today again, always again, but they'd won. And more importantly, they'd made sure the next woman, the next pilot of color, might face one less Marcus Webb in their career. Carlos was running through his side of the checklist, professional and focused. The engines hummed with readiness. The sky beckoned. Jasmine placed her hand on the throttle, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility and possibility. "Ready when you are, Captain," Carlos said with a smile. And for the first time that day, Jasmine smiled back, genuine, unforced, free. "Then let's fly." 45 minutes later, the Gulfstream G650 sat at the end of runway 15, engines spooled up and ready, waiting for clearance from Houston Tower. Inside the cockpit, Jasmine ran through the final items on her before takeoff checklist, with Carlos responding clearly and professionally to each call. "Flight controls checked and free," Carlos confirmed, moving the yoke smoothly to verify full range of motion. "Trim set for takeoff. Transponder altitude reporting mode Charlie." The radio crackled to life. "Williams Aviation, November Charlie 72 Tango, Houston Tower, runway 15, cleared for takeoff. Wind 140 at 8. Jasmine keyed the mic, her voice steady and professional. "Cleared for takeoff, runway 15, 72 Tango." She advanced the throttles smoothly, feeling the twin Rolls-Royce engines surge with power. The Gulfstream accelerated down the runway, faster and faster, the white centerline blurring beneath them. Carlos called out airspeed, 80 knots, V1, rotate. Jasmine eased back on the yoke, and the aircraft lifted off the pavement with the grace of a bird finally released from a cage. The ground fell away, the terminal, the tarmac, the place where Marcus Webb had tried to ground her with his prejudice and failed. "Positive rate," Carlos called out. "Gear up." The landing gear retracted with a satisfying thunk, and they climbed into the clear Texas sky, leaving Houston behind and below. In the cabin, Patricia looked up from her laptop as the wheels left the ground. She'd flown thousands of times, in aircraft ranging from her father's old Cessna to commercial jumbo jets, but there was something different about this moment. This was her daughter at the controls. Her baby girl, who'd grown up hearing stories about the Tuskegee Airmen, who'd soloed at 16, who'd faced down discrimination and doubt and kept flying anyway. Patricia's phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. The story's already viral. Aviation forums, Twitter, LinkedIn. #Justice for Captain Williams is trending. She typed back, "Good, let it trend. Let every pilot like Marcus Webb see what happens when you underestimate people." Houston departure, November Charlie 72 Tango passing through 3,000 for 10,000. Jasmine's voice came through the cabin speakers, calm and professional. 72 Tango, Houston departure, radar contact. Climb and maintain flight level 410. Proceed direct motif intersection, then as filed. Direct motif, maintain flight level 410, 72 Tango. The aircraft climbed smoothly through scattered clouds. Carlos monitored the instruments, calling out altitudes and checking navigation waypoints. Their communication was seamless, the way it should always be in a professional cockpit. "So," Carlos said once they'd leveled off at cruise altitude, the autopilot engaged and the workload lighter. Mind if I ask you something? Go ahead, Jasmine said, making small adjustments to the flight management system. How often does this happen? The Marcus Webb situation, I mean. Jasmine was quiet for a moment, considering how honest to be. Then she decided Carlos had earned honesty. Often enough that I'm not surprised anymore. Not as blatant as today, usually, more subtle. The assumptions, the microaggressions, the constant having to prove myself in ways that white male pilots never do. She glanced at him. You're Mexican-American, right? I saw your last name. Yeah, second generation. My grandfather came from Guadalajara with nothing, worked in the fields, put my dad through college. Carlos's voice was thoughtful. I've faced some of it too. Not as much as you probably have, but enough. The assumptions that I'm maintenance crew, not a pilot. The wow, you speak English so well comments. The surprise when people find out I have an engineering degree. So you get it. I get it. He adjusted his headset. And I'm sorry you have to deal with it. You shouldn't have to be twice as good to be considered half as qualified. But I am twice as good, Jasmine said with a slight smile. So that works out. Carlos laughed, a genuine warm sound that filled the cockpit. Fair point, Captain, fair point. They flew in comfortable silence for a while, the Gulf Stream slicing through the thin air at 41,000 feet, the ground far below looking like a topographic map. The sky was that particular shade of deep blue that only existed at altitude, infinite and indifferent to the dramas playing out in the aircraft passing through it. Can I tell you something? Jasmine said after a while. Of course. My grandfather, my mom's dad, he was a Tuskegee airman. Did she mention that? She did, that's incredible. He faced discrimination that makes Marcus Webb look like a minor inconvenience. Segregation, death threats, being told he was genetically incapable of flying complex aircraft, and he proved every single one of them wrong. Jasmine's hands rested lightly on the yoke, comfortable and confident. He used to tell me, baby girl, the sky doesn't care what you look like. It only cares if you know what you're doing. Wise man. He passed away 5 years ago, but before he did, he flew right seat with me in this exact aircraft. His first time in a jet this advanced. Her voice caught slightly. He cried, Carlos. This man who'd flown combat missions over Europe, who'd faced down racism and violence and discrimination that should have broken him. He cried because his granddaughter was flying a $65 million jet. Carlos was quiet, understanding the weight of the moment. He told me that day that every door I walked through, every ceiling I broke, I was making it easier for the next girl who looked like me. The next kid who got told they couldn't, shouldn't, weren't capable. Jasmine checked their position, made a small course correction. So when something like today happens, I remember that. I'm not just flying for me. I'm flying for every person who comes after me. That's a lot to carry, Carlos said softly. It is, but it's also an honor. She looked out at the endless sky. And days like today, when guys like Marcus get held accountable, those make it worth it. In the cabin, Patricia had given up on work and was simply looking out the window, watching clouds drift past. Her phone continued to buzz with messages, colleagues expressing outrage at what had happened, aviation industry leaders reaching out to offer support, journalists wanting statements. But what struck her most was a text from another black woman CEO she knew. My daughter's in flight school. Thank you for fighting. Thank you for not staying quiet. You're changing things. Patricia typed back, it shouldn't have to be a fight, but as long as it is, we keep fighting. Another text came in, this one from Tom Chen at Elite Aviation. Update: Marcus Webb's employment has been terminated. The investigation found sufficient evidence to support claims of discriminatory conduct and violation of company policy. He's also being reported to the FAA for review. Patricia forwarded the message to Jasmine's phone with a simple note: Justice. The flight to Denver took just under 2 hours. Carlos proved to be an excellent co-pilot, attentive, professional, and genuinely interested in learning from Jasmine's expertise with the G650. They discussed aviation theory, shared stories about challenging landings they'd made, and even laughed about some of the more absurd clients they'd flown for over the years. As they began their descent into Denver, Carlos handled the radio communications while Jasmine flew the approach. The crosswind she'd predicted was there, but it was well within her capabilities. She crabbed the aircraft slightly into the wind, making constant small corrections, feeling the plane respond to her inputs like an extension of her own body. 500 feet, Carlos called out, looking good. 400, 300, 200. The runway rose up to meet them. At the last moment, Jasmine kicked out the crab with the rudder, straightened the nose, and the main gear kissed the pavement with barely a chirp. It was a textbook crosswind landing, smooth, controlled, professional. "That was beautiful," Carlos said with genuine admiration. "Absolutely beautiful. Thanks, you did great on comms." They taxied to the executive terminal, running through the after-landing checklist. As the engines wound down and the propellers slowed to a stop, Jasmine felt the familiar satisfaction that came from a job done well. No drama, no doubters in the cockpit, just professional flying. Patricia appeared in the cockpit doorway. "Excellent work, both of you. Carlos, thank you for being a true professional today." "It was my pleasure, Mrs. Williams." He stood and gathered his bag. "Captain Williams, it's been an honor flying with you. I hope we get to do it again sometime." "I'd like that," Jasmine said and meant it. After Carlos had departed and Patricia had left for her meeting, Jasmine sat alone in the cockpit for a few moments. The aircraft was silent now, just the ticking of cooling metal and the distant sounds of the airport beyond. She pulled out her phone and saw the messages that had accumulated during the flight. Texts from other pilots, women and people of color she'd mentored or flown with, expressing solidarity and sharing their own stories. Messages from aviation organizations asking her to speak at events. Even a few journalists requesting interviews. But the one that made her pause was from Richard. "Proud of you, kid. Your grandfather would be too. Keep flying." Jasmine looked out the windscreen at the Denver skyline, the Rocky Mountains rising beyond it like jagged teeth against the sky. Somewhere out there, Marcus Webb was probably dealing with the consequences of his actions. Somewhere out there, another young woman of color was dreaming about becoming a pilot. Somewhere out there, the fight for equality in aviation continued. But right here, right now, in this cockpit that belonged to her, Jasmine Patricia Williams was exactly where she was meant to be. She thought about her grandfather, about the P-51 Mustang he'd flown in World War II with the red tail that marked him as a Tuskegee airman. She thought about the Cessna 172 he'd taught her to fly in, patient and encouraging, never doubting she belonged in the sky. She thought about every barrier he'd broken, every door he'd forced open so that she could sit in this seat. And she thought about the future. The little girls who might hear this story and decide they could be pilots too. The young women who'd see that standing up to discrimination was possible, even necessary. The sky didn't care what she looked like. It only cared that she knew what she was doing. And she did. Jasmine smiled, gathered her bag, and climbed down from the aircraft. She had 3 hours before the return flight to Houston. Time for coffee, time to debrief with her mother, time to breathe. Tomorrow there would be more flights, more challenges, probably more Marcus Webbs in different forms. But today she'd won. She'd stood her ground, claimed her dignity, and flown her aircraft with skill and grace. Today the sky was hers. And as her grandfather had taught her, once you claimed the sky, no one could take it from you. Not prejudice, not discrimination, not all the Marcus Webbs in the world. The sky belonged to anyone brave enough, skilled enough, determined enough to reach for it. And Jasmine Williams had always been all three. She walked across the Denver tarmac toward the terminal, the mountain air cool and clean in her lungs, her captain's bars gleaming in the afternoon sun, her head held high. Behind her, the Gulfstream G650 sat gleaming on the tarmac, not just an aircraft, but a testament. A testament to excellence that needed no permission. A testament to dignity that should never be negotiable. A testament to the fact that the sky, vast and infinite and beautiful, belonged to her just as much as it belonged to anyone. And she'd defend that truth, for herself and everyone who came after her, for as long as she could fly. The end.